Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 16, the last chapter in Emily Braun's Book 2. Join the Discord, join the coffee, comment down below, like and subscribe, share with those who you think might enjoy the story. Let's get into it.
Chapter 16. Temporary Respite, as usual. Emily sat on a crate beside Marill, who was resting on the ground as she changed the belts on her M2. She was leaning on Marill, her cheek resting on the still slightly sweaty shoulder of the Centauress, and her eyes scanned out along all the men and women sitting in the staging area. Hyrule and Cackle were pulling security, their masks betraying no emotion, but Emily could still read how hard they were gripping their weapons. The light twitch of their helmets as they scanned, the upset nature of their shoulders. They hated seeing this many women in distress, and were not dealing well with being this powerless to help in any way. The few children they had found caused constant issue with their crying, which was setting the two humans on edge. Emily started going through the races, and while some were a singular example, others sat in groups. There must have been 40 different species in this hangar, and what really unsettled Emily was that she, Cackle, and Hyrule were the only humans in the hangar bay. Some of them Emily didn't even recognize, just a poor, odd-looking soul that had fallen through a rift between their worlds. Nearly 200 sat waiting on the cold stone floor, both they and their liberators drained of energy.
I have healed all that I could.
Humir panted out as she slid down to the ground in front of Emily, leaning her head back and resting it against the crate beside Emily's thigh.
There were some with open, oozing lacerations, but Sweet and I managed to stabilize a lot of them. The wounds are horrendous, and a lot of the men and women have names carved into their bodies, over and over again like a tally.
Humir closed her eyes, shaking her head back and forth.
There are so many of them here, Emily. So many people. They have been going through bodies like we do clothing. How can such a horror exist here? Now? When we are all working together as well as we are?
Emily didn't want to say it, but she sighed out angrily, leaning up and away from Marill with a grimace.
Unfortunately, humans can be, well, there can be a lot of darkness inside some of us. It's a problem that's been around for as long as there's been humans. But we had abolished the practice. Are you saying that you're...
Not to this level, no.
Marill murmured, settling herself against the side of Emily's crate and patting her thigh.
We have had some sickos, sure, but it's far more rare, and they normally get names. I'm sure you've read about us. We don't war as long, we have very few deviations, only a handful of killers and murderers every decade or so.
Emily swallowed, an odd, unsettling flavor of shame worming its way into her intestines.
You don't understand it yet, but you humans truly are odd,
the Torque said, and she could nearly feel it settle down onto the crate beside her as well, even though it was only a sensation.
Everyone wars, everyone kills. But for these folk to engage in wars for over 10 years, it is rare. They don't have the mindset for it. Like Humir says, there are some deviants, rapists, and the like, but they are so out of character that they are big news, defining chapters in history. Normally there's a major war, let's say every 20 years, lasts for a few months, and people retreat to lick their wounds. You humans have indulged in carnage that can turn the stomachs of elves and dwarves alike.
What about you?
Emily asked the Torque, reaching over and wrapping a hand around Marill's.
What about your people?
The Torque was silent for a minute, its focus roaming around the room, and she felt it lean towards her within her mind.
Let's just say we're a lot like humans, my people. Why I find such a kindred heart in your kind. However, it is extremely difficult for us to love, to grow attached, to desire more than the hunt and the kill.
Emily squeezed Marill's hand.
You guys are getting fatigued from this kind of stuff, aren't you?
I'm at my fucking wit's end.
Humir moaned out, settling her rifle across her lap.
2 gun battles in the same week. I've killed more people now than I killed in my lifetime. If we keep this up, I'm going to go insane.
Marill chuffed out a laugh, then leaned over and gave Emily a soft kiss on the temple.
I'm doing okay, just a little tired of killing people, aren't you?
Emily turned her head, kissed Marill on her shoulder, then pressed her forehead into Marill's arm. She thought about it, sighing out through her nose. She was angry. From what she had seen here, from what she had heard, it had sparked off the same kind of rage that a lot of her kind was used to. Emily opened an eye and glanced towards Cackle and Hyrule, and she felt that same kind of rage wafting off of them. She knew that if she, Hyrule, and Cackle were let off leash, they would have hounded and hunted these people until either they were dead or until they had killed every human affiliated with this place. It didn't even feel odd to her. It just felt like something she could easily do, and that she felt the other 2 humans would have had the same level of care. She knew that with this kind of impetus fueling her, she could kill and kill and kill until she either ran out of steam or no longer had anyone to kill. The Torque snorted.
See what I mean? It's why I started to not care when I was banished here. I found a people that could kill as deeply as I desired, and relished in the same kind of bloodshed I held dear. You humans are odd, strange, and utterly terrifying. Hell, I've seen your lot find love mid-battle and start flirting even as the walls of shields came in. Not to mention you tend to infect those around you. Give it a year, and the elf will start to get jitters after being still for too long.
I mean, we're divers.
Humir groaned, closing her eyes.
Why are we doing special operations anyway? We should only be out looking for treasure and taking shots at the occasional cultist.
Marill held up a finger as her other hand started running its fingers through Emily's hair.
Spec Ops, not special operations.
It's the same thing.
Humir grumbled. Marill waggled her finger.
No, one sounds stupid and the other sounds badass. Besides, you volunteered to come, and all of us know how long humans can keep this up for. Don't you remember the blurb in the cultural readiness packet that talked about it? The War of the Stray Dog? The Bucket War? Over 50 wars that lasted 100 years. Hell, they even went to war with birds.
Apparently, there were some vicious beasts because they lost, remember?
Humir piped up, looking over to Emily. Emily rolled her eyes over to Humir, her mind flooding with the months of memes that triggered off a single 4chan post.
Don't go there. Emus are resilient.
The Chinooks failed to fit inside the hangar bay like the Blackhawks, so instead the pilots landed some ways off while the Blackhawks ran a ferry service, taking the rescued races one payload at a time to their actual transport. An entire platoon of DBI agents landed first, joined by a small squad of FBI agents in field gear, swarming out into the facility to garner any information they could about the operations that went on there. Cackle and Hyrule reboarded their ambibird once Colonel Hardscotch had returned, nodding to Emily, Humir, and Marill professionally before busting out into poses as the craft pulled away, which Emily knew at once to be JoJo in nature. Emily, Humir, Sweet, and Marill were the last to leave, boarding a Blackhawk which the pilot stated would be taking them straight back to their company building. Time had gotten away from Emily, and she looked past the door gunner station out onto the slowly passing mountains, the sun rising up brightly from behind their peaks. It was surreal, but for some reason, it comforted Emily. The lingering pools of fog, burning red and orange with the light of the sun, curling around the blue, purple, and green of the mountains and the trees that littered them was a living painting before her eyes. The wind whipped in through the open doors, teased and played along her hair, and she couldn't help but smile. In only a short couple of hours, she had volunteered for a rather risky insertion, been shot multiple times, had her knee blown apart, and then had to tangle with the assertions that her own race was a bit of a chaotic piss-take when it compared to the majority of the planes. Now that she thought about it, the last 3 days had been an extremely taxing time, going from wading through a firefight in the woods, getting bumped around and banged by the vessels of Sweet and Mary, as well as having to put all of her faith and trust into someone she didn't even fully know yet. That being Agent Cochran and Sweet, respectively. Emily felt immensely tired, rubbing at her eyes with a dirty palm as the peaks passed by both underneath and around her as the Black Hawk made good time through the mountains. Marill, naturally, was enjoying every minute of the ride and kept pestering the door gunner on her side to try and get the pilot to fly lower. Humir had already nodded off in her seat, her head lolling back and forth and a thin stream of drool falling past the corner of her open mouth. Mary caught Emily looking at Humir, glanced over, then quickly changed seats, pulling down her sleeve in order to lightly dab at the spittle, trying to make a beeline for Humir's chin. Sweet watched Mary for a moment, then looked to Emily, the two locking eyes and holding each other's gaze. Sweet's at first dull pink eyes brightened immediately, casting a light pale pink shadow onto her cheeks, and Emily narrowed her eyes in response from her seat beside the door gunner. What Emily had seen in the shower area of the facility had confirmed her suspicions about Sweet. While the woman looked nothing like the two combat androids and looked just like Mary in terms of minutiae design, she did not act like Mary. Mary was adorable in nature, did nothing but panic and hide during the combat, and dotes on everyone around her like her life depends on it. Mary had even been brushing Marill down before their final Black Hawk trip, and kept fussing with Emily when Marill had finally fended off her brushes. Emily glanced down at her knee, the hole expertly sewn shut with a small patch that Mary had taken from her own borrowed clothing, before quickly glancing over to Mary. The Simuli had changed seats and pulled Humir's head over, letting the elf nuzzle into her shoulder, and she smiled brightly to Emily, her face cheery despite what had happened earlier in the dark hours of the morning. Her eyes flicked back to Sweet, and she knew that the Simuli's eyes had never left her. She inhaled slowly, and her mind tangled with the quandary that was Sweet. Should she send her on her way and keep Mary? Mary would make a fine addition to the collection as far as she was concerned, and the company building could use someone who actually gave a damn about cleaning. Sweet, however, there was something else about her. Yes, Emily had seen her fold clothes with lightning speed, and her hair had never felt better after their shower together. But watching her in combat, Sweet breezed through multiple gunfights with not even a wayward glance, and handled herself as if she had done such a thing multiple times. What really scared Emily was the ease in both muscle and mind when she ripped the heads off the two men, and the look that the Simuli had in her eye. It hadn't been sadness or remorse, but disappointment. Had she been disappointed in those two men for being defeated so easily? Was she angry at how humans were behaving at this point in time? The question buzzed in her brain as she glowered at Sweet, but her eyes were dragged away by the door gunner giving Emily a nudge on the elbow. She looked over towards the man, and he pointed down towards the trees as they passed near the peak of a red-looking mountain, its faces craggy and barren of soil. Down below, in the trees, large cracks of violet lightning were scouring the ground, and a live, pulsing rift of negative light was piercing through the air.
Crackstorm! Lively-looking one, too.
He shouted over to Emily, and they both leaned forward over the side of the Black Hawk, watching the storm develop with idle curiosity. A sudden shift in the air told her that someone had sat down next to her, and she turned her head just enough to see Sweet looking down with her and the gunner. The crackstorm was violent, heaving in with a sucking draw that nearly bent the trees over double towards the ground. Then thundered out with gale force winds, the lightning cracking and splitting the air so loudly that Emily could hear it over the roar of the Black Hawk's engine and thudding blades. The pulsing slit that hovered in the air rumbled and seemed to bubble with both energy and negative light. A darkness so black yet so bright that it even made Sweet open her mouth a little in awe. The mouth of the crackstorm churned in on itself, then percolated explosively outwards, throwing out what appeared to be a long, multi-part train. Coiling out of the rift, the train and its many cars tumbled and rolled across the ground, and Emily became quite worried when, despite the extremely foreign design, it was quite clear that they were passenger cars. When the last car came cartwheeling out of the rift, Emily had counted 62 cars, and the formidable-looking engine now smoking and heaving with clouds of stack exhaust that billowed around it like cigar smoke. The Crackstorm continued to burble, spitting out random vehicles that either gunned it across the rough ground or just rolled, throwing occupants from passenger areas or coming to rest on their roofs. The Blackhawks sped away from it, but Emily saw enough of a building to know that somehow an entire structure had been caught in the throes of the Crackstorm.
Do we help them?
Sweet called out to Emily, still trying to crane her neck to see the Crackstorm. The gunner held up a hand.
Don't worry, we already called it in. DBI will arrive with a fast response team.
Is that what we likely came through?
Sweet asked near Emily's ear, the pink glow from her eyes casting odd tinges to Emily's skin and hair. Emily nodded.
Likely, yeah.
Emily and Sweet leaned out as far as they dared, watching as the Crackstorm split, bubbled, and grew wider, more buildings and vehicles pouring out of it like a busted dam. Even as they made distance away, Emily still knew that people were either dying or falling away from the Crackstorm, and she pitied them.
I'm counting currently 276 life forms.
Sweet said worriedly, her eyes glowing.
Hundreds of fatalities. That's a storm for you.
Emily muttered, then looked away towards the rising sun. The Blackhawk continued to cruise across the Rocky Mountains with ease, and after a short fuel stop, continued on to drop its cargo at their destination. Emily was amazed that the pilot just took the helicopter in through the town's airspace and landed it directly across from Oggledok's recovery and survey. But Emily, Humir, Marill, Mary, and Sweet all hopped out regardless, their boots thudding down onto the grass one after another. The pilot must not have been one for long goodbyes, as he took off as soon as Marill had cleared the blade wash, and the only kind of so long that Emily got was a curt wave from the door gunner. Humir grumbled and ran a hand along her face, blinking blearily as she looked around at the front door.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I could use a good sleep.
I'll take them both, especially Mary. I mean, look how clean my office is.
Oggledok said with a satisfied smile, gesturing around him as he spun around in his chair.
She had the whole thing squared away in only 3 hours.
Emily hummed in her throat, eyebrows raised as she took a swig from her coffee cup. She smacked her lips, then jerked her thumb over her shoulder.
What about Sweet?
Oh, she scares the fucking shit out of me.
Oggledok said straight-faced, making Emily chuckle out and nearly choke on her coffee. He pointed a finger.
No, I mean it. That woman is dangerous with a capital D. The way she walks, the way her face rests, it reminds me of Jomesha when he first cropped up. And he has relaxed since then, let me tell you.
Arranging rooms for Mary and Sweet had been easy, as there was plenty of room, but Jomesha and Sweet had a tense air between them ever since they made eye contact. The two could be happily talking to someone else, but as soon as they entered visual range of each other, they both went silent and watched the other closely until either part faded from sight. Emily had tried to see what the issue was, but neither of the two would talk to her about it, just full cold shoulder. Mary, much to her credit, was a bubbly treat when she introduced herself to Jomesha, and Targe seemed to be smitten, smited, and smote when Mary offered to take a look at some old stitches that were starting to bother him. Yoipua took to Mary like water to a deep fryer, and Yoipua made a note to hide from Mary any chance she got to avoid being cleaned and groomed. It was one of the few times Emily could remember where Yoipua actually panicked in open fear, and the harpy made quick, click-clanking feet in retreat when Mary's voice piped up from somewhere in the building. Sweet, on the other hand, was received with cool friendliness, as everyone in the building picked up on her odd aura, especially Jomesha. When the two had shaken hands, they held their grip for a long, long moment. The tension between glowing blue and radiating pink eyes making everyone else clear their throats awkwardly.
She'll be a great field asset. I know that much.
Oggledok said, then waved a hand towards Oscar as he approached the door.
And I'm hoping she will at least keep our people alive. Do you think they want to be paid?
Oscar nodded to Emily with a smile as he slid inside, a folder in one hand and a tea in the other.
Well, hey there, hero.
Morning, Oscar.
Emily said, giving him a half-hearted wave while sipping from her mug. Oscar held the folder out to Oggledok.
Numbers are back from the battery sales. We're sitting pretty, finally. Have enough left over to give us roughly 4 months of leisure time. All the vehicles have been repaired, old bills paid, all that nonsense. The mission that Emily did for the DBI really set us up for success.
Lawyer bills weren't looking pretty, I'll tell you that much.
Oggledok muttered, taking the folder and opening it with a flick of his hand.
They said they were going to be patient, but lawyers only stay patient for so long. Whenever I got on a conference call with them, I felt like a sheep trying to negotiate with a pack of wolves. Balding, fat wolves, but wolves nonetheless.
Emily hummed in agreement with Oscar, then leaned back in her chair.
How did your dive go, Oscar?
Not really much to tell.
Oscar said with a sigh.
Had a few close calls against the cultists in the area, but in terms of loot, all we got was combat experience. Anything we found was fucking ruined by the weather or picked over by the cultists. Absolute wash.
Emily shrugged.
It's like that sometimes. Can't always come out with a pair of androids and a bunch of batteries.
Oscar pursed his lips in a sardonic annoyance.
Right. It's clearly that streamer privilege you're enjoying.
Emily chuckled dryly, leaning her head back to stare up at Oscar.
Yes indeed. Even on the diving fields it follows me.
Speaking of which, there is a new set of missions for divers besides finding the loot.
Oggledok said, still reading the leaves of paper in the folder. Emily and Oscar quieted down and turned to him, eyebrows raised as he continued.
Invasive species are starting to crop up here in the States, and the DBI is offering militia-esque tasks for divers while they're on the diving grounds. I wish I could say they weren't as dangerous, but 2 people were killed while trying to call thunderpaws in the Appalachias.
Oscar folded his arms as he leaned against the doorframe.
The Sam fuck is a thunderpaw.
Some kind of cat that feeds off pollen and nectar, as well as raiding honeybee hives. They have some kind of magical property that allows them to generate electricity in their nails.
Oggledok said, eyes still scanning the forms and papers.
Paradivers caught a swipe and it stopped their hearts. Zip, zap, done. People who are trying to keep the honeybee numbers high are offering big money for paws and pelts.
Oscar ran the nail of his thumb along his bottom lip, eyes staring off in thought.
So you're telling me my dreams of being a monster hunter may just come true?
Uh-huh.
Oggledok said blandly, then looked up to Emily.
You, however, are going back out into the field. You'll have 2 weeks off, and then you need to go back out and make some honey of our own.
Emily frowned at Oggledok while squinting her eyes.
I only get 2 weeks of rest. I got shot 5 times, and that only equals 2 weeks. I deserve a week for every fucking bullet hole if you ask me.
But did you die?
Oggledok said flatly, looking up to Emily fully.
Did you die, though?
Emily stared hard at Oggledok, then lifted her mug up towards her lips.
No.
Then quit your bitchin'.
Oggledok said with a smile, then looked to Oscar.
Targe and you would be good on the clearing tasks and hunting down the invasive species. Targe always talked about how much he liked hunting.
Oscar nodded.
Sounds like a fucking gas, if you ask me. I mean, I knew some of the species coming through were a bit odd, but imagine how cool it would be to actually hunt down a giant dire boar. Or maybe even a worm.
Hooray for you.
Emily grumbled, then sipped from her mug before talking again.
You get to go play buck hunter while I have to hunt down underground flesh traders and beings beyond nightmare.
Oggledok chuckled, then waved a hand at Oscar.
Go on and start making plans. You didn't make any money, so you better get ready to be out in the field for a few weeks.
Oscar laughed and leaned back out the door, while in the leisure room Marill was angrily screaming at Yoipua for licking her hands and making her lose their duel on a fighting game of some sort.
And what about me, oh dear leader?
Emily said in a terrifically sarcastic, fawning voice, holding her hand towards her chest in false admiration.
Whatever task do you have for little old me?
Oggledok set down his folder, then laced his fingers together with a pensive air.
Well, I figured with only 2 weeks of time before you go back out to the field, you should make the best use of your time.
The best use of my time?
Emily said with a quirked eyebrow and a smirk on her lips.
What exactly would that be?
Oggledok nodded sagely, though his face rippled with a certain kind of color that Emily knew very well.
I was thinking of a meeting between you and me to discuss your next mission. Semi-formal, alcohol included on the company's dime, of course.
Just a simple meeting between employee and director?
Emily said silkily, her smirk broadening into a grin. Oggledok lifted a hand, pinching at his chin in a dramatically contemplative gesture.
Obviously. I have no idea how it could be construed as anything else. That is, unless you wear something particularly stunning and happen to take my breath away.
Combat boots and work pants it is then.
Emily said with a laugh and stood, holding her mug up near her chest with a single hand while reaching for the door with the other.
And what time is this meeting?
Oggledok stood up from his desk, grinning as he tossed the folder down onto the top of his desk.
How about now?
Emily paused mid-twist of the handle, then looked over her shoulder. Her eyes slitted flirtatiously.
Now? So early in the day. Whatever will the other employees think?
Is there a better time than the present?
Oggledok said smoothly, walking around his desk and reaching around Emily to open the door for her.
Who knows when you'll get selected for a special mission or have to run off and save the world again.
Emily leaned her head over just enough to place her lips near Oggledok's ear, letting her breath tickle at his flesh.
Well, that depends on if I can convince my boss to give me more than 2 weeks of time.
I'll see what I can do,
Oggledok said with a blush, then let out a frustrated bark of anger as Emily licked him from chin to ear and darted out the open door. She was already rapidly fading from sight out the back door when Oggledok recovered enough to yell,
Are you fucking kidding me? That's it! You're going back out to the field in only a week!
After their meeting together for an early lunch again, Emily arrived back at the company building and decided to go and see Jomesha. While walking through the main leisure area, Emily spied Targe sitting together with Mary as they both watched human-made movies. Mary stared on in fascination as Harrison Ford stared wide-eyed at a Rutger Hauer while rain fell around them. Emily stepped out the back door and walked over to the garage where she knew Jomesha would be, and sure enough, he was inside the armor panels of the odd personnel carrier, installing one of the batteries she had retrieved.
Is that the Tin Man I see? Working upon the carriage pulled by a horse of a different color?
Emily called out, clasping her hands behind her back. Jomesha's voice rumbled out from within the vehicle's innards.
Worry not what happens behind the curtain. Worry for the road ahead and its tribulations.
I knew you would watch that film by now.
Emily said with a smile and poked her head around the detached armor plate of the futuristic man-hauler. Jomesha had managed to pull out the damaged power cell and install not 1, but 3 batteries inside of it. Wires gently clenched between his skeletal teeth as his fingers buzzed and whirred from within the control box.
The hell are you getting ready for?
Emily asked him in bewilderment and looked up to see the long belt of ammunition that fed into the forward turret. Jomesha chuckled, speaking normally despite the wires in his mouth.
It is not for me, but for you. From what I hear, you may take up a new hobby and complete yourself with a nemesis.
Still, you think you know me, don't you?
Emily said in a bored tone, but pressed a button, allowing the sliding door to unlock and be moved out of the way.
What the hell would I need an armored tactical personnel carrier for?
Who knows?
Jomesha muttered, reaching over to grab the inner plate shield for the connections box as a battery hummed a system to life.
You may start a merry band of brigands and run around as a road pirate. I hear it is very fashionable in Utah and Arizona.
Emily clicked her tongue, pulling down a wall seat and sitting upon it.
Ah, my dear Jomesha. I'm afraid that the pirate's life is never for me. It'd be a diver's life.
Never say never,
Jomesha said to her and clicked on a couple of switches. The vehicle hummed to life for maybe the first time since it arrived on this plane. The systems whirring and blinking to life while compressors wound shrilly, priming the engine. Jomesha clicked another switch, and the grumbling engine purred to life with only a few coughs.
The old beast still has life yet,
Jomesha said, and Emily could hear the grin he could not produce.
Rolling foot, this old girl. Should keep you company when the desire arises.
Emily blew out her cheeks after puffing them, looking around at the small screens that were still running their boot sequence.
If I ever have to use this thing, I am beyond fucked. It looks quite old.
Jomesha and Emily turned to see Sweet peeking in through the open hatch, looking around with a disapproving eye.
Quite old, really. None of these screens are even thermal plasma.
The time in which this vehicle was made still used CRT screens in their war vehicles. I'm sure there's a reason why they would do this instead of a better option,
Jomesha said shortly to her, closing up his last panel with an annoyed whack of steel to steel.
I will be replacing them, obviously.
Obviously.
Sweet muttered, then climbed in smoothly to sit next to Emily.
Miss Emily, I have been hearing some interesting reports via your... how did they call it? The dark web.
Jomesha chuffed out an electronic laugh.
You would do better staying off of that. There's a reason why it hides in the shadows.
Yes, that much is also obvious.
Sweet muttered, making a face as if she had smelled dog shit on her shoe.
But I'd set out keywords to try and catch...
Jomesha held up a hand.
I was going to let her wait till at least dinner time before telling her that.
You thought the same thing?
Sweet asked him, and much to Jomesha's open ire, she seemed surprised. Jomesha glared at her, despite the lack of eyebrows or movable eyelids, and Emily was impressed at his skill.
Obviously.
Well, let's hear it then.
Emily said glumly, setting her chin on her upturned palm.
What do I have to look forward to?
Jomesha looked to Sweet, and she looked back at him. Perhaps the only time that Emily had seen the two stare at each other without open hostility.
It's... that man.
Sweet said with disdain on her tongue, folding her legs in a way that said she did not like talking about him even in the current tense. Jomesha sat back against the power cell and its armored carrier, looking over to Emily with a look of pity, another score for his emotional display talents.
It's Ulfrith. He's already hiring and setting up shop somewhere else.
We didn't even slow him down, did we?
Emily said in a tone more ringed with anger and frustration than defeat, but it felt the same to Emily. Jomesha reached over and placed his metal hand on her knee.
No, Emily. I'm afraid, if anything, you just made someone very powerful very annoyed.
Emily stared out the sliding armored door of the passenger bay, narrowing her eyes as she felt the fire burn inside of her, and the presence of the Torque settled down beside her in an unseen seat.
Good.
Emily said lowly, raising her head and sitting up straight.
He has 3 weeks head start till I'm done resting. Then... I'm gonna stretch my legs again.
And that is the end of the Emily Bronze Book 2. The Section 222 book is currently in review for final publication via its self-publishing. Don't get too excited. I am way too white and male to get published in today's setting, so it'll be self-publishing from here on out, more than likely. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk and tell others who might enjoy hours upon hours of audio, drama / book goodness. Book 4 of the Veil Riders is already on chapter 6 or 7 of being written, so we're already off to a pretty good sprint going that way. The Veil Rider Kids Picture Book / mini novel is underway. Eggplant is doing all the art she can when she can, so it's going to take a while, but that's how art is, I guess. The RPG book, or the Veil Rider Field Manual and CC Manual, are out for sale. You can find them on Coffee and Drive-Thru RPG if you so wish, but I must recommend you go to Coffee because Drive-Thru it's a website, and that's all I'm going to say about that. A huge shout out to the members here on Coffee. We'll start off with the first shirts with E Machino, Cody Jiro, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. These 4 have been really keeping the channel supported and keeping the VAs paid, so I extremely appreciate their support. Next is the E4 Mafia, my fellow specialist brothers. Kiwi Bastard, Lacuna 8, Josh Beatty, Jake Spear, Matty Boy, Noah Freeman, Flash of Green, and Crusader 0625. Sham Shield for life. And of course, all of those who are in the Snuffy Squad, we do appreciate you as well. Until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Simba, Annika Storm, Hailey, Rue, Jmoda, and Camryn, Mech, Alexis. We'll see you next time.